Welcome to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. A cowboy is an enigmatic character. His reality is spending hours a day in the saddle in all kinds of weather, being eaten by mosquitoes and beaten up by the animals he worked. But he lives a life that was romanticized in legend, story, and motion pictures. He has to be a veterinarian, fence builder, horse rider, but he likes silver and silk and a fair amount of ornamentation. He's proud to display his talents in the rodeo, but he's too humble to talk about it. A character from the past that lives and works today much as his predecessors did. So on this edition of Okanagan Pioneers and Places, we look at the evolution of the cowboy. Welcome to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with you, and to tell our story today, we've met him before when we did the story about the drovers. Ken Mather, he's the curator of the historic O'Keefe Ranch, and today we're talking about the, I guess, the evolution of the cowboy. And I mean, the cowboys that work here in the Okanagan today owe their origins a lot to all sorts of other cowboys that came before.
Absolutely. It's interesting to see that the culture around the cowboy, how they dress and the gear they use and how they work cattle, we can trace the origins of that all the way back to Europe, before people even, the white people came to North America.
So there were cowboys in what parts of Europe?
Well, the two areas we look to are southern Spain and the highlands of Britain. And in both those areas, they had cattle that they herded, and a lot of the techniques that they used and the material they used found its way to North America as people began to come to the New World.
So obviously the Spanish influence moved into Mexico, and of course Mexico used to be California and Texas and a variety of other southern states, and the English, I guess, came in the east coasts of United States.
That's right, yeah. But when we look at this, we see that the Mexican cowboys, the vaqueros of Mexico, vaquero just means cowboy, they lent so much to the culture of the cowboy. The terms that are used, the material that's used, the type of saddle and everything came out of Mexico. That's where the origins are.
So if we think of, say, vaquero, what would be the English equivalent of vaquero?
Well, it's interesting how the English kind of mangle the Spanish words, and buckaroo is actually an attempt to say vaquero.
And what else? I mean, we've got things that we wear called chaps.
That's
that would be
chaparreras, which is the Spanish word that the English took and shortened up a bit.
Okay, we call it a lasso in I guess, the rope that you throw at cows.
A lasso. The other term they used was la riata. Riata being a type of rope lasso,
so
and that's lariat.
Okay, so obviously all of this stuff is coming up from the Mexican influence, and the other influence would be English coming from Texas. They were pretty big in this regard.
That's right. In fact, the English settled on the east coast of the United States, and their techniques and the people who were herding cattle met with the Mexicans in Texas. And so changes took place there, so that after a short period of time, you had a very distinct difference between the Texas cowboy and the California cowboy, or buckaroo as he would have been called. And those sort of spread north, and both had a very strong influence on British Columbia in the 1860s and 70s and 80s.
Because that melding would have taken place in the United States, and then it would have melded even more when it got to British Columbia.
That's right. So British Columbia cowboys in the early days were absolutely distinct from those cowboys found on the Canadian plains and prairies.
Excellent. Okay, let's take a break and come back, because all of the gear that is around us here, you've brought from the historic O'Keefe Ranch, and we can actually tell a lot about the cowboy by what he's riding in and what he's wearing.
Absolutely.
So we're going to do that. We'll look at the evolution of cowboy technology right after this break. Welcome back to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with Ken Mather. We're talking about the evolution of the cowboy and the evolution of cowboy technology. Best place to start is, I guess, with saddles.
Absolutely.
Yeah, these, you could tell where the guy came from on the basis of the look of the saddle?
In the early days, you certainly could. There was a distinct type of saddle that came out of California, Oregon, and up into British Columbia compared to the one out of Texas. What it boiled down to was how you roped a cow. The Mexican vaqueros would wrap their rope around the saddle horn, and when the cow got to the end of it, they could give a little bit and still keep it cinched up. Whereas the Texas Cowboys tied hard and fast. They tied the rope directly to their saddle, and when the cow got to the end of that rope on a dead run, you'd have a fairly good so the idea was, of course, to have a saddle that was more sturdy to withstand that real bang when the cow got to the end of the rope.
Yeah.
So the early Texas saddles are like the first one we're going to look at here.
And it's kind of a small one, but a big high back, an easy chair.
That's right, a high cantle, because of course you spent all day in it. You wanted to be able to lean back and relax. But you'll notice it's got two rigging rings, and those are where you'd fasten the saddle to the horse. And of course the idea behind that was to have a good solid hold on your horse, because when that cow hit the end of the rope, your saddle could go with it, and you on top of the saddle.
You didn't want it spinning around. Now, it had also sort of leather bits that slid off, that are hanging off. What were the purposes of those leather tassels?
The leather tassel, various types of leather tassels would be used either to tie your rope on or tie things onto the back of your saddle.
Bedroll, something like that.
That's right, and they were also little places where you tied down the leather to the tree underneath the saddle. So you used the tassels that hung down for other purposes.
So that saddle would be about how old?
That's a very early style of saddle. It would go right back to the 1870s.
Yeah.
It's a half seat. You can see there's only half the seat is covered, and so you could very easily get to the stirrup leathers, because that also tended to wear out and you needed to be able to change them regularly. This one's interesting as well in that it's what's called Sam Stag rigged. You can see that front rigging ring goes up and loops around the saddle horn to give a little extra strength to the saddle.
Yeah. And it's also kind of plain compared to this one,
yes,
which really, I mean, it looks, with the exception of not much silver on it, Mexican.
That's right. That's a very California saddle. The differences you notice right away, first of all, it's only got one rigging ring, which meant it was attached to the horse with only one cinch or strap underneath. A big, wide saddle horn that, of course, allowed you to wrap. And the Spanish used a term called darle vuelta, which means to take a turn or take a wrap around the saddle horn. And the English decided they'd call that dally. So you'll dally to the saddle. And of course, you needed a special type of horn to allow for that.
Yeah.
This particular saddle also has a very unique Mexican type of thing called tapaderos. We call them taps. And they're actually covers that go over the stirrups. Because the Mexicans tended to be doing a lot of herding in thorny country where you would scratch up your boots badly, so you had a covering for the front of your stirrup.
Okay, tapaderos.
Tapaderos,
Taps.
yes.
So that's that saddle, and again, it's a sort of a mid-1800s, late 1800s?
Late 1800s. It's called a loop seat because, again, there's little slots cut out where you can actually change the stirrup leathers fairly easily.
Right. And then the one down in front really connects wonderfully with the Okanagan history.
That's right.
Because carved right into the, what is it called?
Into the cantle, the back of the cantle.
Is whose name?
W. Richter. And of course, the Richter family were among the very first cattlemen into the Okanagan Valley in the Karamias area. And Richter Pass, of course, is named after Frank Richter.
Was it double or single rigged? I'm getting into the technology.
It's single rigged, and there you go. Again, the Okanagan Valley very much, you saw single rigged saddles, not the double rigged ones.
But this one has also got steel stirrups as opposed to wood stirrups.
That's right. Obviously fashionable, I think, more than anything. The trick would be if you fell from your horse and got nailed with one of those steel stirrups, you probably wouldn't get up again, whereas a wooden one would bounce right off.
But the Richters wouldn't fall out of that saddle
never.
at all. Okay, those are saddles, and again, you can see the evolution of them, and they're not English saddles at all, because they've all got pommels and big cantles and stuff, because you wanted comfort and function.
Absolutely.
Look at this rope. This, well, I don't know, what do you call this actually? Is it called
This is a riata. This is a true Mexican riata. It's braided rawhide. It's a very long rope. The riata larga, or long lariat, would have been up to 70 feet long, and this is a particularly long one, all woven out of rawhide that had been soaked in water and then woven. But it had the advantage of holding a nice, tight, firm loop because it's fairly stiff.
So you could actually, 70 feet?
a good Mexican vaquero could nail a cow at 70 feet. Now, that's a pretty good toss.
This is just such a wonderful artifact
beautiful
to have
artifact,
because
yeah.
now this looks more like rope that I know. This is what kind of rope?
That's a hemp rope, and that would have been used by more of the cowboys up in this area because the riata took a very special talent to be able to work.
Yeah.
Hemp would have been used all around, and the area where the rope fed through the loop is called the honda, and this one has a brass honda, which is...
So another Spanish word probably.
That's right. Honda is a Spanish word as well.
And so that's a hemp rope, and it's much lighter, more flexible. Did you have to have a different technique than when you used the
You wanted
riata?
to get closer to the cow, that's for sure, because you didn't have the distance you'd have with a riata.
Now this rope, I'm just amazed by it. It is made out of what material?
Braided horsehair. You can see it's actually quite prickly. Now that wouldn't be used for roping cattle. It would be a lead rope, and they called them a macate. Again, a Spanish term. We keep running into those.
Then a macate, have we anglicized that at all? I
We
haven't
call
heard
it a
that before.
macate or
Yeah.
a macardi.
Yeah.
And that's the English again trying to deal with those Spanish words.
And the function of, well, the lariat was to actually rope the cow that you were chasing.
That's right, because you needed to either doctor them or branding, or any time you needed to get close to a cow, you had to rope it.
This was probably a lead as opposed to a rope.
That's right, more for a horse's bridle.
Now back behind your head there up on the wall is a modern rope of polypropylene. It works pretty good, and about how long?
Works very well. In fact, it's very much like the old riata in that it's quite stiff, and so it holds a loop, and so you can throw it out there and it stays a nice round loop for a long period of time.
Yeah. Just amazing, the technological changes. Boots, is that where we go to next?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Look at these babies. I mean, were they called stovepipes? Did they have any kind of a name for them?
That's a very Texas type of boot. The interesting thing about the early ones is that they had a single piece of leather in the front. They didn't have what's called a vamp, which would be an inset. So starting with the toe and working all the way up, at least halfway up where they put a new inset in, is all one piece of leather. So they tended to get a little crinkled around the ankle. But again, you could see the cowboy began to develop his own type of boot. The stitching all became very ornamental, but the high heel was used to hold you in the stirrup and not let you slide right through.
There were sort of dogs to keep you from getting through that way.
That's right.
Good
Yeah.
stuff. Now, that's an amazing... Compare this to this adult boot.
That's
I mean,
right.
Whose idea was this? What was the background to a boot that short in the top?
Well, around the 1920s, the cowboys decided that those high leather boots tended to be a little hot. And so they used a half boot like this one here. And you can notice it's developed a very pointed toe.
Yeah.
And the very high heel has stayed. In fact, it's become even higher yet. Those are not a walking boot by a long shot.
They were meant to be left in the saddle.
Absolutely. Cowboys didn't spend much time on foot.
Exactly. So you've got a saddle, your most essential piece of equipment, the rope, second most important, boots, because as you say, you've got brush whipping by you, you've got a heel that's going to keep you in the saddle, keep you out of the stirrup mess. And there's some other stuff too, like spurs and hats. We'll take a break and come back and talk about the evolution of them right after this break. Welcome back to Okanagan Pioneers and Places, talking with Ken Mather today about the evolution of the cowboy and cowboy technology. This photograph, I mean, first of all, I wonder why these cowboys went into a studio and posed for this photograph, but maybe we'll talk about that later. Look what they're wearing. Chaps, another thing that cowboys had to wear for obvious reasons if you knew the country they were riding through.
That's right. This photograph is of Okanagan Indian cowboys, and they played a big role in cowboying in the Okanagan. But the chaps is an interesting story. First of all, the Spanish vaqueros riding in that thorny country found that any normal pants would get torn to shreds. So they actually wore leather coverings over top of their legs. And these came to be called chaparreras, which of course the English shortened to chaps. Now the original chaps were what was called shotgun chaps, and we've got a set that we have here. And you would pull them on over top of your pants, and they're called shotguns, but it's like two barrels that you slid your legs into. The obvious problem was getting them on and off over your boots. So they developed a type of chaps that were called batwing chaps, where you actually hooked them around your leg and snapped them to snaps at the back. And
they were kind of open at the back and typical at the front.
That's right, easier to get in and out of by a long shot.
Yeah.
But then what they found, especially the northern cowboys here in British Columbia, was that in the wintertime, in the cold, wet, rainy season, which is often when they were doing roundup, they were cold wearing these leather chaps.
Yeah.
And so they developed the woolies. actually made out of Angora goat skin, most of them. Some of them were bear skin or some other type of fur, but the woolies were very warm, they shed water, and they became kind of the symbol of the British Columbia cowboy. You see more photographs taken with the woolly chaps than just about any other
And
type.
you could get white chaps like this guy's, or dark chaps.
That's right. Yeah, the black chaps would have still been the Angora goat in most cases, although I've seen them made out of everything from horsehide to bear. So
The other thing I notice around their neck is really quite a big scarf. I mean, and in our modern age, that's sort of a feminine affectation, but did it have a function?
absolutely, the bandana was very functional. In fact, what we find about the cowboys is that most of the things they used had a very good function, but they also were decorative to some extent. The bandana was used, especially if you were riding all day behind a herd of cattle, you'd be eating a lot of dust, and so you would pull it up over your nose and you'd be able to breathe a little bit easier. The very finest bandanas were made of silk, and the silk ones allowed you to breathe easily through them. Not only that, they served as a scarf in the wintertime. Silk holds the heat very nicely around the neck. The bandana was always an important part of the cowboy gear.
Right on. The hat, I mean, it did a lot. It shed water, it protected you from the sun, but
Yes.
it also told you where you came from.
That's right. In fact, the creasing of the hat and the way the hat was arranged told a lot about the early cowboys. They had a type of pinch where there were 4 creases in the hat that were called the Montana pinch.
Yeah. You got, have you got a pinch in your hat there?
Mine's not a Montana pinch. It would be a 4-way one.
Yeah.
But this one is an early type of creasing as well. Again, you would tell by the creasing where the cowboys came from. Also the curl of the hat. The earliest ones were very flat. And then over the years they developed a curl so you could fit your hands around it. And the cowboy hat, of course, became the symbol of the cowboy for years to come. And still today, the very best cowboy hats will shed water for 10 days of rain and it won't soak through.
Because what's it made of? Felt?
The best ones are made of beaver. Actually, the same as the English top hats, and beaver will shed water tremendously well. Ordinary felt will begin to soak up the water after a period of time.
All right, so your hat is important, and it to who you were. Spurs. Now look at, we've got some spurs here, just beauties. Now this strikes me as just a big, bad set of spurs. The guy who wore these had an attitude, it strikes me.
Well, that's right, and maybe didn't love his horse as much as he should. The big rowel is called the Great Spanish Rowel. Again, came out of Spain, and the vaqueros used a larger roweled spur than the regular cowboys out of Texas and out of the northern plains.
Can you imagine that jingling and jangling? This is called, it's got a name. Look at this little part here, like a lady's leg.
That's right, the lady's leg or gal leg spur. And as I said, the spurs, of course, had a function, and that was to give your horse a bit of a prick to keep it moving. But of course, they also like to decorate their things up, and the gal leg was one of the most popular designs.
And look at, it's got, of course, the clubs, diamonds, spades.
Yes, the cowboys tended to play a lot of whist, I think, in their spare time.
Definitely whist. And this one, too, has an interesting neck to it.
Called the gooseneck spur. Once again, combining that function, the very small rowel, which really didn't do much damage to the horse, just kind of woke him up a bit, but also dressed up in a very special way.
And finally, just a sort of a massive spur, and it has kind of a downcast to it. Have I got it upside down at this stage?
No, because you can see from the buffalo head on it, which is a silver buffalo head on the brass, that was again a very popular spur. Some of them looped down and some of them looped up. And
obviously
really,
you had to have a good high heel or this is going to be dragging on the...
That's right. Yep. And you, again, the spurs told you a lot about the cowboy, where he came from.
And of course, this is the part about the cowboy that I find kind of interesting, because why would the cowboy have gone into the studio to have these pictures taken?
Well, you know what? The cowboy, even though he's a great outdoorsman, there's a touch of vanity. And when you can dress up in your finest duds and put on your silver buckles and conchos and your woolly chaps and have a picture to send back to home, you were in your element as well.
Now, when we begin thinking about where cowboys came from, of course, some were born to the ranch.
Yes.
And they grew up as kids and then they became cowboys. It was the natural evolution of things. But some people were captured by the romance somehow of it,
Yes.
and they came from all over the world to become cowboys.
Absolutely. Beginning back in the 1880s, the dime store novels spread around, and they were stories, romanticized stories of the cowboy and the great shoot-ups and everything like that. And that captured the imagination of thousands and thousands of young men and women all over the world who came to be cowboys and cowgirls on the ranches of North America.
Yeah. Well, even the cowboys loved it because I guess Buffalo Bill Cody had a bit of cowboy in him, but he turned into a showman. Wild Bill Hickok was probably cowboy, then sheriff, and now showman.
That's right, and Buffalo Bill's Wild West show was the ultimate way of spreading the cowboy way of life, and it traveled all over the world, even appeared in front of Queen Victoria in England. And the cowboy way of life was portrayed, again, very romantically, lots of woolly chaps and Wild West sort of activities going on.
You had to be careful of what you called a cowboy, it strikes me, because even cowboy was pejorative in the beginning. He was an outlaw by first definition.
That's right. And then the term cowboy became applied to the young men who would drive cattle up from Texas and from other areas as well. And pretty soon the name cowboy became a badge of honor.
What about a cowpoke?
Now, cowpoke actually comes from when you were trying to load the cattle into cattle cars at the end of the trail. And you had long poles. Actually, that goes back to the Spanish plains as well, that you had pike poles, and you poked the cattle, and that prodded them up the gangplank.
Now, imagine that a guy who rode the range did not like to be called a cowpoke.
A cowpoke or a cowpuncher wasn't necessarily a pleasing term to the cowboy in the early days. And again, over the years, it became more acceptable.
Yeah, but you had to be careful of the cowboy you called a cowpoke.
That's right.
Right on.
Absolutely.
The other thing that these photographs brings to my mind is the fact that the Indian cowboy was an integral part of ranching in British Columbia in the Okanagan.
Yes, unlike a lot of the areas in North America, right from the very beginning, the Indian cowboys were an accepted part of the cattle industry. And it's one of the few areas where the native people actually found equality. The Indian cowboys were accepted on all the ranches of British Columbia. In fact, fully half of the workforce on the ranches were the native cowboys. They were natural horsemen, and they had a flair for working cattle that made them very, very good cowboys.
And I guess you proved where you were in the echelon of cowboys every day.
That's right. If you could work cattle and you could ride a horse from dawn till dusk, you could be a cowboy. And the native cowboys, of course, were among the finest.
And they began to show off, and hence the rodeo history, which is in Carameus and Falkland and everywhere else in the interior.
That's right. The rodeo, again, another Spanish term, comes out of the leisure time activities of the cowboys. They were very proud of what they did. They wanted to show the others that they were better than the next guy. So how fast you could rope a calf, or how well you could ride a bucking bronc, or a bull.
That was insane.
That was a little crazy, but then the cowboys weren't noted for their wisdom.
And they were the workers of the ranch world. I mean, and they were right here, and they still are in the Okanagan.
Absolutely.
If you go to the Douglas Lake or any other ranch, gang ranch, you'll find the cowboys of today.
The cowboy way of life is alive and well in British Columbia.
Excellent.
Yes.
Ken Mather, thank you for bringing it to our attention. And if you'd like to have a closer up look at some of the artifacts that we've talked to you about today, visit the historic O'Keefe Ranch, and a lot of other places too have got excellent displays of brands and all sorts of other things that were used day to day on the world of the cowboy. We'll see you next time on Okanagan Pioneers and Places.